10 women alike for centuries. Everyone loves a good rags to riches fairy tale love story, right? But digging a little deeper into her story, you would quickly realize that Queen Esther's story is more of a nightmare with a happy ending than a fairy tale. Esther was orphaned as a child. Both of her parents were gone. The Bible doesn't tell us how, but we do read in Esther chapter 2, verse 7, that her name was originally Hadassah, and that her cousin Mordecai, who had been taken into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar, brought her up. In verse 8 of the same chapter, we read that Esther was taken to the king's palace. This does not indicate that she signed up for this. The king was in search of a new queen, and an edict was given. They went out and took young girls from their homes. You did not have a choice. I don't know about you, but I would have been pretty distraught being taken from my family and sent off to a palace with a bunch of girls I did not know. But we all know how the story goes. Verse 17 tells us, the king was more attracted to Esther than any of the other women. She won his favor and approval more than any of the other versions. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen. If we stop there, you would have thought that Esther had a rough start, but her dreams finally come true. Romans 8:28 tells us, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. God was working out the details in Esther's life, even in the midst of troubles and trials, and we can be sure that he does the same for us as well. However, there was something about this new queen that King Xerxes did not know. He did not know that she was Jewish. As the story unfolds, we are introduced to an evil man with a huge ego and a huge vendetta against the Jewish people, Haman, a nobleman of the king. Haman sent a decree for all of the Jewish people to be killed on a certain date, but nobody knew that the queen herself was Jewish. Her cousin Mordecai had encouraged her to keep that information to herself and use her Persian name of Esther instead of her Jewish name of Hadassah. Mordecai encourages Esther to plead for the lives of her people to her husband, the king. Mordecai also points out to her that perhaps she had come to her royal position for such a time as this. Maybe this was her purpose. Maybe this was the reason that all of these bad things had happened to her in her life. This probably does not sound to us like a difficult request. Talk to your husband. My parents talk about things all the time. However, this was very different. He was a king, and although she was his queen and he favored her highly, there were rules in place. Rules that said that you did not go and visit the king unless you were invited to do so. And if you did, you could be killed. The only exception was if the king extended his golden scepter and spared your life. The king did extend his golden scepter to her, and she invited the king and Haman to a banquet that she would host for them. This happens a couple of times before she reveals her real purpose and request. The story ends, of course, with the king taking the queen's side, Haman being hung on the gallows that he built for Mordecai. The Jews triumphed, and in Esther chapter 10, verse 3, we are told, Mordecai, the Jew, was in second rank to King Xerxes. Both Esther and Mordecai had terrible things happen to them in their life, which ultimately led them to the place where they were able to do much good and save their people. This is very reminiscent of a story earlier in the Bible involving Joseph. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph said to his brothers, you intended it to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is being done now, the saving of many lives. We can see in both of these stories, God can and will use any circumstance, no matter how bad or traumatic, to work good in our lives or in the lives of others. In the story of Queen Esther, every twisted turn in her life led her to this moment, and every bad thing that happened to her, God meant it for good, to lead her to the place where she would ultimately save her people.